We continue now at the top of Daf Chaf Aleph Amar Aleph and Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 21a. And the previous Amud Rav said that if a malva, if a creditor finds a simphon among his documents, he does not need to take that simphon seriously, meaning he does not need to assume that the debt was paid off, because we can say that he just has the simphon ready when the lova will come to pay him off, then he'll give the simphon to the lova. And the Gemara asked a question from a brisa, because the brisa said that as long as you certify, if you have a certified simphon, then the malva does need to take the simphon seriously. And the Gemara says that's not exactly what the brisa meant. Rather, the brisa means the shailinan luhu l'sadi. We actually ask the witnesses iparua ilo parua, whether it was paid or whether it was not paid. As Rashi explains, the shailinan luhu, the brisa just means that we're asking them imro hapiron, if they saw that it was paid off. Vim lav, and if not, if the witnesses did not witness that it was paid off, nemon hamalva lomer shelo nichtav elalios muchan l'cheshifara. Then the lenders believe to say that it was only written just to be ready, to be prepared, should it be paid off, exactly like Rav said. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from the following brisa, Simphon sheyesh olav edim kosher. It says if you have a simphon and there are witnesses signed on it, it's kosher. And again, it seems to be that the simphon is relied upon to say that the debt has been paid. And the Gemara says to that, my edim, what does it mean it has edim? It means edei kiyim. It means that there are witnesses who certified. And Rashi says, edei kiyim shekosvu henpik de beidina lo mekaimi le ela imkein para. We're talking over here where there's a henpik, says Rashi, meaning to say that the bezdin is certifying this simphon. And Rashi notes that a bezdin is not going to certify it unless it's actually been paid off. And so in such a situation, then actually you would rely, only in such a situation would you rely on it and say that the debt has been paid off. And the Gemara says, Hachanam mistavra, it makes sense to say that's what the brisa means, that you have this henpik, miniktani seifa, because at the end of the brisa it says, V'she'ein olav edim pasel. It says that if there are no witnesses, then it's pasel. My ein olav edim, what does it mean that there are no witnesses? Ilema deleki lav edim klal. If you're going to say it means that there's no edim whatsoever, tzricha lememar de pasel, do you even need to say that's pasel? It's obvious that's pasel. Elalav, rather, is it not? Edei kiyim, it refers to witnesses of certification. Again, it refers to this henpik. And the Gemara continues, Gufa, returning to what we said above, Simphon sheyesh olav edim, if you have a simphon with witnesses, Yeskayim bechosma, you should certify it with those signatures. And Rashi explains, Simphon sheyesh olav edim means be'edei kiyum mukmin Allah. We're talking about where you have edim that certify the simphon. So then again, Yeskayim bechosma, you certify those signatures. Ve'afilu yotzim mitachas yad mal v'kosher. The Bryce is saying in such a case, if it is certified, then even if the lender is the one that has the simphon, it's going to be kosher. We can assume the debt has been paid. And the Bryce continues, Ein olav edim. Let's say there are no witnesses. And Rashi explains for that, Ein olav edei kiyum, meaning you don't have any witnesses of certification. Aval edim chasum and olav, but you do have witnesses signed on the simphon. There's just no official certification. So in such a case, v'yotze mitachas yidei shlish, if it's in the hands of a third party, and Rashi says, v'yotze mitachas yidei shlish, she'ein halov v'motzio. The point is that it's not the borrower that has it, v'lo hamalvin, it's not the lender either. Ela shlish shebeineihem, rather it's a third party that has the simphon, so then nemon, so then it's trusted in that case as well. And finally the Brisa says, O sheyotze la'achar chisum shtaris, if you have the simphon actually written on the shtar itself, beneath the signatures, so then also kosher, then also it's going to be a kosher simphon. And Rashi says, O sheyotze achar chisum shtaris, if it's written after the signatures, sheyotze lefanenu kishu kosu b'shtar chov, it's written on the shtar chov, achar achasima, after the signatures, kosher, then it's going to be kosher. Again, in such a situation, in these situations, the simphon can be relied upon. We can assume that the debt has been paid. And the Gemara says, Yotze mitachas yidei shlish. Now, if it's in the hands of a third party, da'ahemne mal v'lishlish. The reason why that's trusted is because essentially the lender trusted this third party. And Rashi says, da'ahemne mal v'lishlish da'al karchach ein kosev shover el malva, because it has to be that the one who wrote the shover is the malva, is the lender, v'hu misaro li'ad shlish, and he gave it over to this third party to watch over it, and therefore, since he trusted to give it over to the shlish, that shows that it was in fact paid off. And then it said, Yotze la'achar chisum shtaros nami, also in a case where it's written after the signature on the shtar chov, that's also trusted the lav de priya, because if not for the fact that it was actually paid, lo have morally l'shtar, he wouldn't have ruined his shtar. Hadron aloch shnayim ochazin, we will return to you parak shnayim ochazin. This is the end of the first parak of Meseches Bava Metzia. If you're enjoying these videos and this channel, please like, share, and subscribe, and take a look at the description box below to see how you can support this channel. And we will now begin the second parak of Meseches Bava Metzia. And the parak begins with the Mishnah, Elu Metzias Shalo, the following things that the person finds he can keep for himself. ve'elu chayiv lahachers, and the following things he has to announce. And the Mishnah explains, Elu Metziah Shalo, the following things that he finds he's allowed to keep. Matzah Peiros Mefuzarn, if he finds fruits that are scattered. Mos Mefuzaros, if he finds money that's scattered. Krichos B'Rishos Harabim, if he finds bundles of grain in Rishos Harabim. Vigule Devel, if he finds round cakes of pressed figs. Kikaros Shal Nachdom, if he finds loaves of a baker. Machrozos Shal Dogim, if he finds strings of fish. V'chatichos Shal Basar, or cuts of meat. V'gizeh Tzemer, or fleeces of wool. Halakuchen Mimidinasan, which are taken as they are from their state. Vanitze Pishtan, if he finds stalks of flax. Ulashonos Shal Argaman, and he finds purple wool, combed purple wool. Hare'elu Shalo, all of these belong to him. All of these are considered items without a siman. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol sheyesh bo shinoi chayiv lahachers. Anything that has some distinguishing feature, the person has to announce. Keitzad haso matzah igul v'socha cheres, if he finds a round cake of pressed figs and inside of it is earthenware, or kikor v'socha mos, if he finds a loaf and inside of it is money, so then that's something that has a distinguishing feature and it has to be announced. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, Kol klei anpuria chayiv lahachers, any vessels of anpuria, ein chayiv lahachers rather, any vessels of anpuria, a person is not obligated to announce. And Rashi explains, Elu Metzias Matzah Peiros Mefuzar, and again scattered fruits, Nisiyayishu Habayla Mehen. The point is that the original owners have given up hope. Kedamar b'Gemara, it says in the Gemara, v'hefkerhein, it's considered to be hefker, it's considered to be ownerless. Mos Mefuzaros, also money that's scattered. Hoel ve'ein lahem simin nikar, since there is no clear simin, there's no distinguishing feature that the owner can use to identify it. Iyushay meyayish, then he surely gives up hope. V'havalu hefker, it's considered ownerless. V'zeu tam kulam. Rashi says this is the reason of everything that's listed in the Mishnah over here. Krichos is omrim ketanim, against small bundles. That's talking about small bundles of grain. That's the Aramaic translation. But Rishos Harabim, if he finds these in Rishos Harabim, shakol doshan alayu, everybody steps on it. Even if there was a siman tied to it, it would have been destroyed. And Rashi continues, shal nachdom, if you have the loaves of bread of a baker, so that has no siman. Kol kikaros hanachdom and shav, and all of the loaves of the bakers, they were the same. Avol kikar shal balabayis, but when you had loaves of the private individual, yeshba and siman, those did in fact have a siman. That's why the Mishnah specifically talks about the loaves from the nachdom. Mimidinasan, and then it said, if you have the gizeh tzemer, this is the wool, the fleece of wool that's purchased mimidinasan from their state. What that just means is kemos shein gzuzas, meaning as they're sheared off the animal, they're not changed at all. Keshar kol gizas hamadina, like all the shearings, it's identical to all the shearings that you find throughout the province. Lafuke habos mi beisa uman, that comes to exclude ones that come from the professional. Kedekatani seifa, like it says at the end of the Mishnah. And Rashi continues, v'loshen shel argamon tzemer saruk, this refers to wool that is combed. Umashach kamin loshen, it's pulled like a tongue, that's why it's called loshen shel argamon. But savu argamon u'metzuyin hein, it's dyed purple, and it's very common to find, and therefore it's not considered to be a siman, and that's why he's able to keep it. And the Gemara says, Matzah Peiros Mefuzar, and if he finds fruits that are scattered, the Mishnah says he can keep those fruits. The Gemara says, V'kam, and how much? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak says, Kav ba'arba amos, one kav in 4 amos is considered to be scattered. The Gemara says, Hey, chidami, what exactly is the case? Derech nefila, if it's there, derech nefila, meaning it looks like it fell there. Afilu tuvanami, even if it's more than a kav v'dalet amos, it should be considered ownerless. V'derech inuach, and if it looks like it was placed there intentionally, afilu batzer mehachinamilos, even if it's less than that, he should not be able to keep it for himself. And Rashi says, V'kama choshe pizur, how much is considered scattered? Kav mefuzar bi'arba amos. If you have one kav scattered in dalet amos, that's considered scattered. Avol begimel amos, let's say you have one kav in 3 amos, lo have a pizur that's not considered scattered. V'taima mefarash v'yazal, the Gemara will explain the reason. And the Gemara said, derech nefila, if it looks like it fell there, in motzam derech nefila, if it looks like it fell there, and that's how he finds it, sheyesh ladash lahunchu sham midas alanaflu, it seems like it was not placed there intentionally, rather it fell there. Afilu tuva mikav nami, so even if it's more than a kav, to kaven dein ben simon, since there's no simon, he surely gave up hope. V'derech hinuach asid lachzer v'lidlon, and if it looks like it was placed there, he's going to come and return, and the owner is going to take them back, so then the person should not be able to keep it. And the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Ukva bar Chama, Rav Ukva bar Chama says, B'machnashta devei dari askina, we're talking about where it's gathered by the threshing floor. Rashi says, B'machnashta devei dari b'shas asifas gronos, we're talking about when they gather by the threshing floor. V'chan doshan ba'aleim units where the owners threshed it, v'nosu, as so ikar v'nosru elu, he took the main part, and there was a little part that remained, that's what happened. And so the question is, if that little part that remained, is the owner planning on coming back to get it, or is the owner just making it ownerless? And so the Gemara says, that's what we're saying. Kav ba'arba amos, if it's one kav and dalet amos, the nafish tirchayu, that's a lot of bother to have to gather that together. Lo tarachinish, a person's not going to bother, v'lo hadar asi, v'shakalu, he's not going to come back and take them, and therefore you can assume afkuri mafkirlu, you can assume that he rendered them ownerless. But batzer mihachi, but if it's less than that, so tarach v'hadar asi v'shakalu, then he will bother in return and take them. V'lo mafkirlu, he's not going to make it ownerless. And Rashi says nafish tirchayu lekavson, again it's hard to gather, but batzer mihachi, but if it's less than that, meaning imhaya pizuran bepachos mikan, if it was spread out in less space than that, that's the idea. So then already in that situation he will bother to come back, and he's not making it ownerless. And the Gemara continues, boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah asks, Chatzi kav b'shtei amos ma, what if you have a half a kav in 2 amos? That's essentially the same proportion. Kav ba'arba amos time amai, the reason by kav ba'arba amos, the reason why kav ba'arba amos, what's the reason that's considered scattered? Mishum de nafish tirchayu, because that's a bother. But chatzi kav b'shtei amos, if you have a half a kav in 2 amos, came in the low nafish tirchayu, that's not as much of a bother because it's less in total. Lo mafkirlu, so maybe that's not ownerless. Oh, dilmo, or maybe mishum de lo chashivi, the reason is because it's really not important. People are not going to bother with a kav and dalet amos. V'chatzi kav b'shtei amos, if you have a half a kav in 2 amos, came in the lo chashivi, that's also not an important amount. Mafkirlu, he's going to make that hefker, that's going to be considered ownerless as well. Rashi says, Mishum de lo chashivi oleh kav peiros letroach alein. He's not going to bother with a kav of fruits to burden himself, Torach kibbutz shel arba amos, that he's going to go and gather them from within dalet amos. That might be the idea. So again, that would make a nafkamina, that would make a difference when you're talking about a half a kav in 2 amos. And the Gemara continues along the same lines. Kabayim b'shmona amos ma. What if you have 2 kav and 8 amos? Again, the same proportion. Kav b'arba amos time amai mishum denafish terchayu. When it comes to 1 kav and 4 amos, what is the reason? It's because it's a bother. V'kol shekain kabayim b'shmona amos. Certainly, if you have 2 kav and 8 amos, that's a bother. Kavan denafisha terchayu. It's face, since that's even more of a bother. Mafkerlu, he's going to make it ownerless. So dilmor maybe mishum delo chashivi, because it's not an important amount. V'kabayim b'shmona amos. But if you have 2 kav and 8 amos, kavan de chashivi, that already is an important amount. So lo mafkerlu, he's not going to make it ownerless. So again, that's the question by 2 kav and 8 amos. And the Gemara continues, kav shumshamin bi'arba amos mahu. What if you have a kav of sesame in 4 amos? What's the halacha over there? Rashi explains, shumshim in dakin mode, they're very small. V'yesh torach b'kibutzon yoser mechitin. It's more difficult to gather them than wheat. Avol demein yikarn, but on the other hand, it's more expensive. So that's why there's a specific question when it comes to kav shumshamin bi'arba amos. Kav bi'arba amos time amai. The reason why a kav bi'arba amos, it's ownerless. Mishum de lo chashivi, it's not important. V'shumshamin, but when it comes to sesame, kaven de chashivi lo mafkilu, since it is important, the person does not render it ownerless. So dilmar maybe mishum de nafish terchayu, because it's a bother to gather. V'kol shekain shumshamin, certainly when it comes to sesame, kaven de nafish terchayu, it's face, since it's even more of a bother. Mafkilu is going to make it ownerless. And the Gemara continues, kav tamre ba'arba amos. What if you have a kav of dates in 4 amos? Kav rimone ba'arba amos. If you have a kav of pomegranates in arba amos ma, what's the halacha? Kav bi'arba amos time amai mishum de lo chashivi. When it comes to a kav in 4 amos, what's the reason? It's because it's not important. Kav tamre ba'arba amos. Kav rimone ba'arba amos nami. When it comes to a kav of dates in arba amos, or when it comes to a kav of pomegranates in arba amos, they're also kaven de lo chashivi. Since that's not important, mafkerlu, he's going to render it ownerless. Odilmer maybe mishum de nafisha terchayu. It's because it's a bother. V'kav tamri bi'arba amos, v'kav rimoni bi'arba amos. But when it comes to a kav of dates in 4 amos, or a kav of pomegranates in 4 amos, kaven de lo nafish terchayu, it's not such a bother to gather them. Lo mafkerlu, so he doesn't make it hefker mai. What's the halacha? And the Gemara says to these questions, teku, the Gemara leaves it as a question. Rashi says, tamarim v'rimonim, when it comes to dates and pomegranates, gasimheim, they are large. Vein torach b'kibbutz, and it's not a bother to gather them. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots, itmar, it was stated, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis.